Level 1, the associate. You were 14, the first time a man in a good suit handed you an envelope. He didn't tell you what was inside. That was the point. You were an associate. The very bottom. Not a member, not protected, just useful. You ran the envelope where it needed to go, and you kept your mouth shut, and at the end of the week, a few folded bills came back down to you. That was the deal. You do the small jobs nobody important wants to do. You washed the door. You collected a bookie slips. You sat on a corner and noticed which cop drove past and when. And you learned the one rule that mattered more than all the others put together. Omerta. You never talked to the police. Not to save yourself. Not to save your family. Not ever. Break it and you're dead. It was that simple. Everything you earned, you kicked up. Cut to the soldier above you. Kicked up to his captain. The money only moved one direction. Up. Here's the part they don't put in the movies. You could do this for 30 years and never once be allowed in. There was a real man named Henry Hill. He ran with the mob his whole life, from the time he was a kid. He earned. He had his own little crew. He was as connected as a man could get, but his mother was Irish. And to become a made man, you had to be full Italian. So Henry stayed an associate forever. Rich, feared, and never truly one of them. And in 1978, Henry's World pulled off the biggest cash robbery in American history. 6 masked men walked into the Lufthansa cargo terminal at the airport and walked out with $5.8 million. Henry didn't go inside. He just knew about it. That was enough. Because the man who ran that heist, Jimmy Burke, had a problem. Too many people knew. So one by one, over the next year, nearly everyone connected to that money turned up dead. That was the associate's life. You were close to everything and safe from nothing. And when the wall finally came for Henry, he did the one thing you swore you never would. He talked. His testimony put 50 of his own people in prison. But you weren't Henry, you were Italian. And that meant a door existed that Henry could never walk through. To walk through it, you had to do one thing first. Level 2, the soldier. To get made, you had to make your bones. That's the real phrase. It meant you had to kill someone. With your own hands. Not out of anger, as proof that you would cross the final line and then never speak of it again. So you did. Then 2 made men vouched for you. One of them had known you for 15 years and staked his own life on yours. They brought you into a back room with the curtains drawn. A gun and a knife were laid on the table in front of you. Someone took your trigger finger and pricked it with a needle, and a single drop of your blood fell onto the picture of a saint. Then they set the picture on fire, and you held it burning in your bare hands, and you said the words, "As this saint burns, so will my soul, if I ever betray this family." You enter alive. You leave dead. Then they gave you the rules. Never touch another man's wife. Never raise your hand to another made man. And never ever deal narcotics. That last one, everybody broke. They kissed you on both cheeks. And just like that, you were a made man, a soldier. The lowest rank that actually counts, and the biggest jump you would ever make. Because now, you were untouchable on the street. No one from another family could lay a finger on you without starting a war. And now you gotta earn for real. A soldier ran rackets. Loan sharking was the cleanest money there was. You lent a desperate man cash at 5–10% a week. Not a year, a week. And nobody ever went to a judge to collect. You collected with a phone call, and if the phone call didn't work, you sent someone. You booked bets. You hijacked trucks off the airport before the shipment was even logged. You leaned on the shops on your block. Every week you counted it out and you kicked the biggest share up to your captain. Here's what nobody tells you. For long stretches, the books were closed. That means the family stopped making new members completely, sometimes for decades. The button wasn't a job you applied for. It was a lottery ticket that almost never got handed out. And you had it, but a soldier still takes orders. And you were done taking orders. To give them, you needed men of your own. Level 3, the capo. So you built a crew. Now you were a capo regime, a captain. 20 soldiers answered to you. Some captains had 100. You didn't run the rackets anymore. You ran the men who ran the rackets. You decided who got leaned on, who got paid, and who quietly disappeared. And every single dollar those 20 soldiers earned, a piece came up to you. Every week, without fail. That's when you learned where the real money was. Not the loans, not the bets, the unions. You got your hooks into the trade unions. The ones that ran the garbage trucks and the shipping docks and the construction sites. And once you controlled the men who did the work, you controlled whether the work happened at all. The builder who wanted his concrete poured on schedule paid you for labor peace. The company that wanted the garbage gone paid you. It was extortion with a necktie, and it was worth more than every stick-up in the city combined. You had a house in the suburbs, no? You had a no-show job on the docks that paid you for work? You never did. On paper, you were a labor consultant. In the neighborhood, you were the law. A room went quiet when you walked in. A man named Paul Vario ran a crew exactly like this, and men twice your size crossed the street rather than pass him on the sidewalk. You thought you had made it. You thought you were the top. But there were men above you. Men you had never even met. And there was a table, somewhere in the city, that you had never been invited to sit at. Level 4. The underboss. Then, one day, the boss started asking for you by name. First, he made you his counselor, the consigliere. You weren't in the chain of command anymore. You were something rare. You were the one man the boss actually listened to. Two capos were an inch from a war that would put bodies on the news. They came to you, and you cooled it down before a shot was fired. Then he made you his underboss, his number 2. Now you ran the family day to day. You spoke with the boss's voice when the boss wasn't in the room. There was exactly one man left above you. The boss himself. You had started as a 14-year-old holding an envelope you weren't allowed to open. Now you were one heartbeat from the throne. And you started to wonder what his chair would feel like. It's a dangerous thing to wonder, because there was only one way to ever find out. The man in that chair had to go. Level 5. The boss. On a cold night in December 1985, a boss named Big Paul Castellano stepped out of a black car in front of a steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan. He never made it to the door. Gunmen were already waiting in the crowd, and they took him down right there on the sidewalk, in the middle of the city, in front of everyone. 2 weeks later, the man who ordered it, John Gotti, walked into that same world as the new boss of the biggest family in New York. That was the lesson, and it was the oldest lesson there was. Nobody hands you the throne. You take it. So you took it. You were the boss now, the Don. Your word was law. Nobody in the family moved, spent, or breathed on a job without your say-so. And a piece of everything, every loan, every bet, every load off, every truck, every union contract in the whole city, a piece of all of it came out to you. Gotti wore $3,000 suits and smiled for the cameras on the courthouse steps. They called him the Teflon Don, because they put him on trial 3 times, and 3 times, nothing stuck. You had spent your whole life climbing to this exact spot, top of the ladder, except it wasn't the top, because even now, even as the boss of an entire family, there was something that sat above you. Level 6. The Commission. They called it the Commission. Back in 1931, a man named Lucky Luciano built it. Before him, the bosses simply shot each other in the streets. A war called the Castellamarese War left bodies all over New York and no one at the top for long. Luciano ended it by having the last 2 old bosses killed on the same afternoon. And then he did something no gangster had ever done. He abolished the crown. He got rid of the title, boss of all bosses, entirely. In its place, the heads of the 5 New York families would sit together at one table as equals and settle their problems like a board of directors. That table was the Commission. And for 50 years, it ran organized crime across the United States like a hidden corporation. It approved new bosses, carved up territory. It signed off on killings. It kept the peace, because peace was good for business. And it stayed completely invisible. The director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, spent decades insisting the Mafia did not even exist. Then, in 1957, they got sloppy. Almost 100 of the most powerful bosses in the country drove up to a quiet farmhouse in the woods of upstate New York for one meeting. A local state trooper named Edgar Croswell had been watching the man who owned that house for years. He saw the expensive out-of-state cars rolling in, one after another. He wrote down the license plates. Every single one came back to a known criminal. So he called for backup and threw roadblocks across the only roads out. When those bosses saw the police, the most feared men in America panicked and ran into the woods in their silk suits and their good shoes. They tore their clothes on barbed wire. They lost their shoes in the mud. They threw guns and rolls of cash into the leaves to run faster. 58 of them got caught anyway. And overnight, on the front page of every newspaper in the country, the secret was out. The Mafia was real. That was the first crack. Second one came from inside. Level 7. The Fall. For 50 years, the thing that kept the whole machine alive was the oath. Omerta. Nobody talked. Ever. And then the government found a weapon that turned the machine's own size against it. It was a law called RICO. RICO let prosecutors stop chasing one soldier for one crime. Instead, they could treat the entire family as a single criminal enterprise and put the boss in prison for the crimes his soldiers committed on his orders. In 1985, a young prosecutor named Rudy Giuliani used it to do the unthinkable. He put the actual bosses of the 5 families on trial at once in one courtroom for the crime of running the commission itself. Fat Tony Salerno, Tony Dux Corallo, Carmine Persico, 85 witnesses, 150 secret recordings. And when it was over, most of them were sentenced to 100 years each. The board of directors of the American Mafia was gutted in a single afternoon. The law only got the bosses into the courtroom. Getting them convicted took something worse. It took one of their own. His name was Sammy the Bull. He was an underboss, just like you had been. He had killed 19 people climbing the very same ladder. He had sat in a car with his boss the night they took a throne and helped plant it on a walkie-talkie a block away. Then he heard his own boss, John Gotti, running his mouth about him on an FBI wiretap. So Sammy picked up the phone. He sat in a courtroom for 9 straight days and gave up everything, everybody, every secret, the whole machine. Omerta, the oath that had protected this thing for 50 years, broken from the second highest seat in the family. Gotti, the untouchable Teflon Don, was convicted and sent away for life, and he died in a prison hospital. And Henry Hill, the associate who could never be made, put 50 more of them away with him. The men at the very top of the ladder didn't get there by trusting people. And in the end, the only people who could reach them up there were the exact people they had trusted the most. So you climbed all 7 levels: associate, soldier, capo, consigliere, underboss, boss, and the commission above them all. And every single rung you climbed made you richer, more powerful, and easier to destroy. Because at the bottom, nobody bothers to take you down. At the top, everybody is trying. The men who actually built this thing did not retire on a beach. Luciano died exiled. Castellano died on a sidewalk. Gotti died in a cell. Sammy talked. You didn't beat the system. You just climbed high enough to be worth destroying. And if you want to see this exact rise and fall play out somewhere warmer, one man building an empire on the beaches of 1980s Miami, that story is already waiting for you.